Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ensuring Family-Driven Care and Wraparound, the fifth in our series. We are happy that everyone can join us today. And today, presenting for you will be Joanne Huss, me, on the phone right now speaking, and Marlene Matteries. We've got Tim on vacation this week, so we hope that you'll hang in through the presentation and enjoy yourself and sit back and learn something about family-driven care. So what do I mean by family? When you hear the word family-driven care a lot, and I think sometimes it might be confusing to figure out what family we're actually talking about. There's lots of different families, and what's important for you to remember is that youth define their own family, and families define families. So in this presentation, what we mean by the full family unit is the full family unit identified by the parents or caregivers, the identified youth, and other siblings. So actually, including the youth as part of that family structure. Oftentimes the youth, when we're talking about family, gets left out of the definition, but today we're talking about the entire family structure. The word family can refer to biological families, adoptive families, step families, blended families, extended families, foster families, or other individuals or groups of individuals who play a significant role in the life of the child and often have legal responsibility of the child. So one of the things to think about as we're moving through the slides today is there's a lot of things that can happen to families receiving care, and oftentimes by the time they arrive at your door, the experiences they've had have not been the best. Children and youth coming into Wraparound are often at the high end of the pyramid and are used to going through multiple types of services, most of which haven't worked. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't be arriving at your door. And families are frustrated. They've looked for help. They felt that they have not found the right help. And so sometimes they're not expecting a whole lot out of joining a Wraparound team. So they may feel blamed for their child's behavior. The youth and parents can experience institutional bias about their role. Oftentimes parents are blamed for the child's behavior. You've heard the term, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I have been in many rooms when I have heard folks say, well, what do you expect with those parents? What do you expect the child to act like? And so there's a lot of bias that goes on. Youth and parents often can be diagnosed when they behave with emotion. Something that, maybe one of you would express excitement about with a family or youth might come across as being a diagnosis, or they might get a diagnosis when they display emotion. Youth and parents may be told what will work for them without their opinion being heard. And also, they may be viewed as resistant or defiant if they speak up in the planning process. After they've received so many types of services, they're pretty keen on what will work and what won't work. And when they speak up, a lot of times they can be dismissed, and it's frustrating. And oftentimes, some of the resistance that you see may be because of their past experience. So what makes Wraparound different? You've heard about access, voice, and ownership on our previous webinar from Dr. John Whitbeck out of the state of Washington. And we're going to talk a little bit about it today because really what access, voice, and ownership does is it brings families to the table and as a valid perspective in the whole planning process. The access assures that families are receiving the information and youth are receiving the information that are included in decisions made, as well as being informed about needed resources and services. It ensures that families' voices are heard and that they are full decision makers in charge of their own lives. And we'll talk a little bit about that in charge piece, because I know that always comes up, and people will say, well, yeah, but, this family's mandated by juvenile justice, or they're mandated by child welfare. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. And it also ensures that families have ownership of the planning process in partnership with the team and are in agreement to carry out the plan. If you are included from the very beginning and you feel like you have a voice to make things happen or not happen, then you tend to buy into the process. I think most people feel that way when they are involved in any kind of planning process. You have influence over what's going to happen. From a parent's perspective, parenting can be a challenge. For myself as a parent, when my child first started exhibiting behaviors, what I tend to call big behaviors, the typical parenting classes that I had taken and the skills that I had learned didn't work. We kept thinking that, well, this is just willful behavior, it'll go away, maybe we ignore it, or maybe we pay more attention to it, things will get better. And we tried all the things that everyone told us to do, but they didn't work. And what we know now, many years later, is that when a child has mental health needs, those typical parenting classes, those good parenting skills, don't always work, especially when you have a child that's hearing voices or is extremely depressed or anxious or has compulsive behaviors or even is self-abusive. And then the other thing that we know is mental health problems present themselves as behavior problems. It's the first thing that happens when kids are in school. The behaviors will be the things that get flagged first. And oftentimes schools and others, including my parents, myself included, will view it as, a behavior problem, that there's something that, that the child is being resistant about or not wanting to do, and that they have a choice over doing it or not. What we know now about mental health is that that often isn't the case. Maybe they can't control the behaviors, and the behaviors are only one semblance of really what's going on much deeper. Marlene, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Marlene Meadows. I'm the Director of Training and TA at the Institute. And for this slide, I'm actually, and a couple of other ones moving forward, really representing the perspective of young people. Prior to this position, I had the opportunity to coordinate a youth movement for young people who are involved in systems of care. Before that, I had an opportunity as a care coordinator to really learn from and understand the young people as well as their families. Ideally, we would have had a young person be part of this call and be able to talk about this from their own perspective, but the young woman is actually on vacation this week, so you've got me. So I want to talk a little bit about what Joanne was just talking about, a parent's perspective, from a young person's perspective, being that identified young person who's part of a treatment planning process or a plan of care process and wraparound can be very challenging for that young person. I want you to think about it and imagine if it were you and you were sitting at a table and everyone was discussing their challenges publicly and planning around those challenges. But for these young people who are involved in the wraparound process, a lot of times they have some pretty intensive needs and a lot of stuff going on. I know for me, I can think back to the times where I had young people that I worked with and they had a history of sexual offending behaviors. And that's something that's had a lot of stigma associated with it. But it was our responsibility to make sure that we had a safety plan in place. So we had to talk about it. We had to talk about those hard things. And we had to do it in a way that made that young person feel safe and like they were a part of the process. And that we weren't talking about things about them in a way that was stigmatizing or negative. It could be pretty challenging for those young people in those situations, though. Young people may also feel responsible for their family's problems. For young people who sit at a meeting or part of a process and the parents are talking about how they can no longer go to church anymore because things have just been so disruptive, or feeling alone or feeling isolated or feeling like things just aren't together and the parents are really stressed out. Those are really real feelings and experiences, and sometimes the young person may take that on and feel responsible for all of those things that are going on within the family unit. Young people may feel like a failure if their plans are not successful, and this is really no different than caregivers. You know, when we put plans in place and we're super hopeful that they're going to work, when they fail, that young person or that caregiver may feel like it's their fault and that they're a failure and that they can't do anything right and they're the reason things aren't working. So again, as we're working with young people and their families, we need to constantly remember that the plans are not going to work. That's just part of life, but it's never the young person or their family's fault. Young people want to be normal like any kids do, and system involvement can be stigmatizing. You know, so think about this again from a young person's perspective. When they're at school and they have a one-to-one with them, as an example, within the classroom, or they have a probation officer that they have to check in with, or they can't go to an after-school activity because they've got to go to therapy right after school. Those kind of things are pretty stigmatizing for a young person, and they just want to be like any other young person. They want to get done school, and they want to go to baseball practice, or they want to be in class and not need that additional support or to be different from the other young people that are in their classrooms. So it can be challenging for young people, and again, it's our responsibility as professionals to make sure that young people feel supported and are not stigmatized because of their mental health issues. So what do we mean by family-driven? And this definition of family-driven was developed by the Federation of Families for Children's Mental Health. So this definition is coming from a national perspective of what family-driven means and how can families really be involved in all the decision-making roles that go on. So family-driven means that families have a primary decision-making role in the care of their own children, as well as the policies and procedures governing care for all children in the community, state, tribe, territory, and nation. This includes culturally and linguistically competent support services and providers, setting their own goals, designing, implementing, and evaluating programs, monitoring outcomes, and partnering in funding decisions. And as you can see, this definition really goes from an individual process for a family who their child is receiving services and needs that level of support, making sure that caregivers and parents are involved in that process, as well as moving it up to a program level. So if there's a program that's out there that's serving young people and their families, do they have parents and young people involved in those boards? You know, are parents in a position to where they can make decisions about policies in a specific program that are going to impact the program at large? And then taking it up a level from that, you know, are there policies that are being developed at a state or national level to where there's caregivers involved in that process, because their unique perspective is really going to add to the success of programs, of policies, and of planning processes. So youth guided care, and we use this language. This language, again, was developed federally, and there was a lot of discussion at one point around the language that was going to be used. You know, there was a debate on whether young people should be included in family-driven care or whether there needed to be a separate definition around youth-guided care because young people may be minors and not in a place to where they can drive their own care. They might be in an active state of crisis, so the expectation of coming in and driving their care just really isn't possible for them at that time. You know, and I think that that's true for parents as well. Anyone who's coming into a situation, expecting them to step in and drive might not be possible. So young people, this definition, again, was developed coming from an overarching national level. Youth-guided means that young people have the right to be empowered, educated, and given a decision-making role in the care of their own lives, as well as the policies and procedures governing all care for young people in a community, state, or nation. This includes giving young people a sustainable voice, being listened to, and the focus should be towards creating a safe environment, enabling the young person to gain self-sufficiency in accordance to the cultures and beliefs they abide by. Further, through the eyes of a youth-guided approach, we are aware that there's a continuum of power that should be given to young people based on their understanding and maturity in their strengths-based change process. And that statement, I know that this is a bit wordy, but you know, it's really getting at a similar concept to the definition of family-driven, that young people should be actively involved at all of the different levels that their lives are affected by. So that comes to their individual plan of care process, within agencies, within communities, at the state level, at the national level, where policies are being determined and developed. Young people's voices should be part of that because, again, they have a unique experience and expertise that they're bringing to the table based on their life experiences. caregivers are coming to it from the perspective of having taken care of a young person, the responsibility of that, who has mental health issues and other behavioral challenges. Young people are the recipients of this care. They're the ones who are often in the hospital. They're the ones who've experienced being locked up in juvenile detention centers or receiving care that just wasn't appropriate for them. They're coming to it for their own perspective that should be valued and incorporated.
So what are the guiding principles for family-driven care? When you look at these, they just make sense, and they're really the premise of why we talk about family-driven care, much like, Marlene said about the youth. When you're the one experiencing what's going on, it puts a whole different perspective on it and heightens the importance of things happening in a certain way. And I think it's really important to remember that when we talk about youth-guided and family-driven care, that really is about providers sharing decision-making with youth and families. And when we talk about sharing decision-making, I know that sometimes, red flags go up for everyone because professionals often wonder if families or youth are really in the best position to be able to share decision-making. And what I would say to you is it's developmental. I'm sure were plenty of times in my child's experience in the system when she may not have been in the best place to be making decisions or sharing decisions. And I think probably the same is true of myself. In the beginning, if someone would have asked me to make a decision, I probably would have just looked at it blankly because they're so overwhelmed by what was happening to our family. The acts of voice and ownership are such basic principles of really how to do this work, and it's really what gets us to the place of saying that, if you're going to share decision-making, that you've got to give families and youth complete information. They need to be informed so that they're able to make decisions and choices, because how difficult is it to really to make a good decision if you really don't have the information that is going to allow you to make good choices. And so there's a lot of information that I know doesn't get shared with families and youth, and I think that really Wraparound really promotes that piece of it. The Federation of Families has a saying, nothing about us without us, and I think in Wraparound we would probably say that as well. Families are viewed as experts and partners in the process. Experts is a strong word, but I think probably experts on their own children. They're the ones that have raised the kids to this point usually, and have a lot of experience with what works for the child, what doesn't work for the child. Lots of really intimate details about families and how they have evolved to where they are at this point, and are able to share information that really helps people do good planning. One of the things we hear over and over again from youth and families is the importance of peer support, both parent partners for families and youth partners for youth. I know for myself that there was a huge difference when I first met another parent that had been through the same experience or similar experience that our family had gone to. I think you really feel at a point when you're experiencing distress, when your child starts to receive services that you've been brought to your knees, and you feel that no one else has experienced something like you, and often your times you're very, very isolated. Even if you're not the type of person that normally would be isolated, you tend to withdraw from things. You're embarrassed by what's going on in your family. For me, I can remember the school calling 5 times a day, letting me know that my daughter was telling kids that she was depressed, and things that I was taught growing up that you don't always talk about in public. And so you're pretty much brought to your knees, and the ability to have someone else say to you, "Oh yeah, I've been there, I've gone through this, you'll get through it," and, to really be able to support you is such a crucial piece of family-driven youth-guided care. As a program leader, especially in Wraparound, the leaders need to be able to allocate staff, training, and resources to make family-driven care a reality. If staff are not available, if training is not available to train staff on how to be family-driven, and if resources are not available, oftentimes I hear, well, they don't really have the money to hire peer support, but we really like the way it's done. It just doesn't happen. You've got to be able to make a commitment to it and to really be able to allocate those, the resources, the training, and the staff to make it happen. There's a basic premise that there's such a highlight, a focus on cultural and linguistic competence. A lot of families, and I know my experience working in California where we had a lot of monolingual families, but if families were receiving services and the translator was the secretary in the office or someone that really wasn't a licensed interpreter, it just never quite meshed. There was a lot of information that was being left out. The family's culture and a lot of the way that they thought about the world was really not captured in that piece of it. So it's really crucial to be aware of that and to make sure that you're planning for that. Providers really need to take the initiative to change policies and practices from provider-driven to family-driven. It's something that you can't stop doing and expect it to continue. I've worked with lots of agencies that have reformed their whole agencies to move from being provider-driven to family-driven, only to find out that when they thought they were there and they gave up some of the resources and staff in that area, so they ended up lapsing back into doing business as usual and really losing that focus on family-driven care. So it's just such a crucial principle that needs to be included. Family-driven care is the strongest predictor of post-transition success after education. The families need to be engaged. And when family engagement is there, when families are being supported, you have a much higher predictor of success. 50% of youth, probably more, at least in my experience, when they age out of the system, end up going back and returning to family within a couple of years. Sometimes it's family, a parent, sometimes it's a relative, but they want to know where they came from. They want to be with people that they're familiar with. It's such a key piece of being connected to someone that when we think about, so often kids are severed from their families, and only to go through a system that purports to be helping, and then, at 18, they end up going back and finding that family again. So it's important for us to work with that family to try and set things in place to make things work sooner rather than later. It's a key piece. So why family engagement? And again, this speaks to the piece that we just talked about, is how, when, and why families are engaged in the delivery of care is really the crux of the matter. The effectiveness of service is, no matter what they are, hinged less on the particular type of service than on how, when, and why families are engaged. While traditional forms of care approach mental health treatment in a hierarchical, top-down approach, with a clinician really maintaining some distance from the recipients of treatment, this approach is not reflected in newer forms of service delivery. It is becoming increasingly clear that family engagement is a key component, not only of participation in care, but in the effective implementation of it. And you'll hear this over and over again. You can see that the data on this citation is 1999. It's been a long time coming. We're still moving in the direction of family-driven, and it is as we move forward, we find more and more that outcomes are so closely connected to families being engaged in the process.
So youth engagement works. For young people, I've mentioned this before, and Joanne's been talking this from the perspective of parents. Personal experience is that expertise that young people offer to create systems change. So when you think about youth engagement, and this is engaging young people in their planning process, it's engaging young people in the community and community activities like a youth group to be part of, to have opportunities to really create change within systems and within communities and within their own lives and the lives of other young people. You think about the young people that we're talking about, this population, a lot of times they don't have those same opportunities that other young people have who haven't experienced the systems at this level. You know, they aren't the young people who are like, oh, you know, let's, vote them for class president. That may happen, but they also a lot of times don't have those same opportunities. However, if young people do have those opportunities, then you open some of those doors, and it may be through a youth group chapter, which is a chapter that's an organization for young people who have been involved in the system to really use their expertise and their experiences to create change around a variety of different issues. That's going to help them reclaim their power and responsibility in their lives. Also, when you think about it in the planning process, youth are much more likely to succeed in treatment if their power and voice is listened to and integrated, which just makes sense. If you think about it in your own life, if someone tells you what to do and what's best for you, and that person may not even know that much about you, are you likely to do it, to really buy into it, to really own it? When we talk about the language about ownership, would you do that in your own life? And if not, why would you expect a young person to do that? So again, if they're involved, if they're at the table and someone's asking them, what will work for you? What hasn't worked in the past? How can we make this process a lot better? Are we missing something? What is it from your perspective that's really going on? And how do we make sure that we incorporate that into the planning process? In all of this, when young people are connected to schools, when they're connected to their community, when they're connected to caring adults, young people gain a sense of belonging, confidence, usefulness, and empowerment, and those things are all essential to make sure that they transition into adulthood successfully. So these are the principles of Wraparound, and I think you've seen them ongoing throughout all the different modules that you've viewed so far in this course. And the first one that we look at is family voice and choice. Sorry, there's something built into the slide that I wasn't aware of. Okay, the first principle of Wraparound, family voice and choice. When we think about this, it's when the parent and caregiver and their youth perspectives are intentionally elicited and prioritized. And that's operationalized in the team process. When someone talks about, when the team's discussing needs, what are the needs that are going on within this family's life? And the family has an opportunity to prioritize those needs. When they're talking about here's some strategies that may work for your family, and the whole team is going to brainstorm and throw things out. But that does not mean that at the end of the day, the family is going to say yes to those ideas. They might say yes to one or two of them, or they might have some ideas of their own that they think would work a lot better, and they should be given the opportunity to prioritize those suggestions, their strategies, or those needs. Planning is grounded in a parent and young person's perspective. And again, from day one, the second that a care coordinator gets a referral, the moment that they call that caregiver to set up a meeting, all of those things, all the way through transition, should be really grounded in the parent and the youth perspective. They're sitting down with the family for the first time and really listening to the family story and hearing from them what have their experiences been, how have they gotten through this so far, how do they cope? What is their sense of hope? What do they hope for the future? From that moment forward, everything should be grounded in that perspective. The team strives to provide options and choices that reflect the family's values and preferences. Again, if it's really grounded in a family perspective, then this should be happening. The team should understand the family's values and preferences. They should be asking that on a regular basis. Does this work for you? Does this align with your family and the traditions and the preferences within your family unit? Do you have other ideas that might be better? So determined by family, and so Kim and Joanne talked about the four elements in Wraparound during their last session, and I'm going to bring this up again, determined by family. So this course this module is really focusing on family-driven, and so this language might seem a little bit different to you. For us, we really were thinking about people use the term family-driven regularly, and they use it sometimes as jargon, and it doesn't have a lot of meaning throughout the years. I think it's actually lost more meaning over time because it's just vaguely defined from person to person, and we really wanted to think about what does it mean within the wraparound process, and how do you operationalize family-driven and use values and a lot of the language that we use really in the process of wraparound. And we came up with a definition, some of what Joanne really has touched on so far. The family-determined process includes both the youth and their caregivers, and the family has authority to determine decisions and resources. Families are supported to live a life in a community rather than a program. And the critical process elements of this area include access, voice, and ownership, which is what Joanne spoke about. Families having access to the decisions that are made. And again, this is them being at the table. A lot of times parents' treatment plans happen in a case manager's office, and they come in with a treatment plan, and they hand it to the parents and the young person and have them sign it. That's not giving them access because they sign it on a piece of paper. Being there when the decisions are made and when the discussions happen, that's access. And having voice in that process, making sure that families are feeling heard and listened to, and that there's a team recognition that families are important stakeholders in the planning process. So even if you have a good care coordinator who feels like, yeah, I've got this, and the family feels like they really listen and that they're heard, from the care coordinator, if they get into a team meeting and that team doesn't feel the same way, then it doesn't matter. You need to make sure that the facilitator's job is to make sure that voice is heard across the process, that the family's voice definitely has the highest stake in the process. And ownership, again, making sure that families have ownership of the planning process in partnership with the team, and that they can make a commitment to any plans concerning them. So that they have a role in it too. When you think about the specifics of how the process works, there's strategies, there's needs, and as strategies are being determined, all of the strategies shouldn't be done by the parent, nor should all the strategies be done by team members. And we want to make sure that the parents and the young people actually have an active role in the process. In wraparound, the important role of families is confirmed throughout the duration of care. And again, from day one when you pick up the phone all the way till the end, that important role of families has to be there and has to be a focus of the process. Cultural and linguistic competence, and this is another term that can get pretty jargony. Anyone who's had any training in social services probably has heard the terminology about making sure that you're being culturally and linguistically competent. And a lot of times I think as professionals we think we are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are. And the definition we have here is that every family deserves to receive services and supports that take into account their individual, cultural, ethnic, racial background, sexual orientation, gender identity, and their family traditions. I'm just going to give you an example from when I was a care coordinator and I was working with a young woman, and she identified as a lesbian, and at the time was sort of struggling with her gender identity. I wasn't sure if she was transgendered and was really trying to explore that. She also had an extensive history of self-injurious behaviors, and a lot of times she would cut herself, and she would cut herself so deeply that we would wind up having to go to the emergency room so she could get stitches, and then she wound up being hospitalized, and it was a cycle that we were trying to break. So we were trying actively as a team to find a therapist along with a ton of other support. This young person actually really wanted someone to talk to that would really meet her needs, that would be culturally appropriate to her. And this young woman grew up in foster care pretty much the majority of her entire life, and was finally in a foster placement that was stable and steady, and things were going really well. So we were in a good place in the learning process. And so me being a culturally and linguistically competent care coordinator was determined to find a therapist who had experience working with young people with self-injurious behaviors and also really understood and worked with youth who identified as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. And I found one, and I was super excited and made the referral, got her set up transportation. This young woman went to therapy, and I thought that she was going to come back and be super excited that she had a therapist who really understood her, who also identified as a lesbian, and they could make these great connections. And, she got home, and she called me, and she was incredibly mad and was using every form of profanity you can think of at me. And I was like, I don't understand. I'm really confused. I thought you would really like and be connected to this therapist. She's a lesbian. She works with youth with similar experiences to you. I thought that you'd connect. And she was like, yeah, but she's white. I can't connect the white stuck-up women, and that's what she is. And so for me, I never paused to ask her, what would be important to you in a clinician? Like, who are those people that you think you would connect to more easily and you'd be more comfortable with? And for this young woman, it was an African-American therapist, and she was Caucasian, so that was something that didn't occur to me. And it didn't occur to me because I didn't ask, and I didn't listen, I made assumptions. And so it's really important in the work that we do with young people and families to ask and to truly get in there and really understand their family's cultural experiences and their traditions and those kind of things.
So the next slide is a slide that Marlene asked me, exactly what is this, Joanne? It's maybe it's a figment of my imagination, I don't know, but it was something that kind of made sense to me. I was trying to illustrate via some type of a flow chart the idea about the principles of wraparound and how together that they help create improved outcomes for youth and families. And so you'll see in the first box to the left, family voice and choice is, the first principle of wraparound. Along with team-based, take a team and a family, and you could have collaboration, and then you mix in the other principles of wraparound, natural supports, community-based, culturally competent, individualized, strength-based, and unconditional, and all of that together really creates improved outcomes for children, youth, and families. But the key piece is really the family voice and choice, collaboration, and having a team. So when we talk about wraparound, you think about, well, what would a competent wraparound staff look like? And this is really from I think a family member's perspective that I'd like to identify really what that competent wraparound staff would look like. For sure, it would be someone that treats all family members with respect at all times. I had a unique experience of being working in a large children's mental health organization as they began to do wraparound in Los Angeles County in California. And I was the lone family member within this huge agency of 800 staff. And oftentimes as I would, end up in a lunchroom or somewhere else where people wouldn't be expecting to be heard, I would overhear staff talk about families quite disrespectfully. And felt like I was the stigma buster where I would go around and, kind of say, please don't talk about families that way. When you talk about a family like that, hurts my feelings because you could really be talking about me. But really, for a staff member to be competent, you've got to be able to set all of those kind of beliefs and biases aside and really meet each family as you're meeting a family for the first time and respect them and not talk badly. Also, being able to easily identify multiple strengths of each family member is a key piece of being a competent wraparound staff. There are many, many times where even myself as a family member has difficulty finding strengths in some of the youth and families that I've worked with, but you really have to change the way you think and really focus on strengths as the premise of that's what's going to get things to a better place. People don't get better based on what they do wrong. They get better based on what they do right. And so by being able to identify those strengths really helps create resiliency and helps families and youth move forward. Making each family member feel welcome. Think about the way that you greet families. One of the first wraparound teams I was on, there were several staff members that were fresh out of college. It was probably their first summer working and on a wraparound team that I was on. And I can remember showing up at a family's home that before the family barely had enough money to buy food. And staff members walking in a family member's house with a giant big gulp from 7-Eleven and putting it on the floor and, or eating French fries during the meeting. And it was so disrespectful to me because I felt like, how can we make this family feel welcome if we're walking into their house and not really being respectful about our behavior? And so it's crucial to really be keen on how we're welcoming families into the process. And by providing written materials in a family's primary language, and this has written materials, but also it's like, we had talked about earlier, is that it's spoken materials in a family's primary language. Even living in Los Angeles and with such a large Latino population, we could not find enough staff members that spoke Spanish to ensure that every family had a Spanish-speaking team. And so what happens in those instances is that you just lose so much in the translation. And if we are to be respectful of families, we've got to make sure that the written materials and the spoken materials are really in the family's primary language. Every conversation and meeting, it would be wonderful if folks would start with something positive about the child or youth. Again, building on strengths, focusing on the positive, not ignoring the negative, but really knowing that it's the positive that's going to move the process forward. A staff member that can really put their self aside and not take the criticism or anger or frustration of a family member personally. There are many families that are just tapped out. They're just worn out by the time they arrive at your door. And if you are the type of person that takes that criticism to heart or the anger and holds a grudge or are not able to let go of that, it's going to interfere really in doing wraparound, in the way you do business. It's key to be able to set that aside and not take it personally. It's not about you. It's about the family and the youth. And sometimes I've seen teams make the whole process more about the team than about the family and youth. And so those are just key things that you need to be able to learn how to do to really be competent in your job. The staff member is also able to maintain a positive image of each family member and the belief in their abilities to get better. There are so many setbacks when you have a kid with big behaviors. I will tell you, as a parent that has raised one, that it doesn't go away. Even when they grow up and they become young adults, there are things that come up that you just really sometimes are challenged. But what you need to remember is that there are so many positive things, and if you are able to focus on those positive things and you believe in people's abilities to get better, things tend to get better. Allowing family members to express their needs and offer support is crucial. And, wrap all of those qualities and skills up, it would really create, the perfect, competent wraparound staff and really someone that would be able to move forward and really help families. This next diagram is the wraparound phases of help. We talked about this when we did the intro to wraparound and the 4 different phases of help. But when you look at this diagram, what I've dropped in here is really what the process, what each phase is really focused on. And in the engagement and team prep phase, it's really how families are engaged, how we extend ourselves, how we welcome families, how we welcome youth, how we are respectful, how we get them involved in the process. The second phase, the planning phase, is really about how services are negotiated and tailored. Are we listening to families and youth? Are we taking into consideration what they have to say? Are their needs being expressed in the planning process? And are we tending to those needs and negotiating and tailoring the service to meet those needs. In the implementation process, it's really about how, when, and where negotiated interventions are delivered and modified. I can't tell you enough how those interventions need to be out in the community, in families' homes, in places that a child in that quote-unquote normal arena would be. You need to think about if you're working with a 14-year-old child, what would a 14-year-old child in any community across America be doing, and what's more normal. And I hate to use that word normal because you really have a question of what's normal, but when we think about families and youth as being different when there are mental health issues or big behaviors, we often forget about what helps create the ability to live in a community and participate in a community, in school and in normal activities. And so it's really about making sure that those negotiated interventions are delivered and modified as need be. The transition phase is really how families move through and out of services. So during the planning phase, which is probably, I can't say it's the most important phase because I probably feel like every phase is the most important phase. But during the planning phase, when really the action begins to fall into place, being family-driven requires families to be involved in all planning and selecting what will be done and being able to be part of all discussions and decisions about them. Again, nothing about us without us. Making sure that family members have all the information. We talked about this a little bit before, but they need to be informed partners and know and understand the pros and cons of all the options. Provide families with sufficient time, the right tools, the skills, the resources, and supports to have a meaningful role in making good decisions. And again, this is developmental. In the beginning, when sometimes they might just need a break before they're able to participate. The same is true of the youth. The youth might not be in a place where they're ready to participate in this, but as long as you continue to focus on their strengths and to continue to try and engage them, that's developmental and usually will fall into place. The evaluations, assessments, and treatment and service plans should include a strong focus on strengths, talents, and skills. One of the things that we did in the project that I worked in LA was we changed our electronic medical record to include strengths, talents, skills, natural supports. And so we had a traditional Department of Mental Health service plan that in our electronic record we just dropped in these extra things that you would find in Wraparound. And it was part of really telling the story. And one of the things that I think is so important is that with families and youth, that there's always a story that follows, and oftentimes the story is a sad story or really about how things went wrong. And in Wraparound, we think about retelling that story to include the strengths and talk about the things that went right. And this is really a key piece of being able to capture that. And it stays with families and youth forever. And so by being able to capture those strengths in that service plan are really crucial. The needs identified on treatment service plans are based on what the youth and family have identified. The plans are developed with the family and their identified supports. So the youth coach, a big brother, a cousin, a mother's sister, or a father's mother. There are extended folks that should be involved. And when a family is in a place where they might not be able to identify those needs, and I certainly have been there as a parent, there are other people that are close to them that can identify the needs of what needs to happen and to support the youth and family. And a meeting about a youth and their family can only be held if the youth and the family are there, or their designated representatives if that's the case. But it's pretty hard to hold a child and family wraparound team if you only, if the youth or the parent are not available. And this happens so many times. You'll hear about, well, we had a wraparound team, and you'll find out that maybe only the care coordinator and the youth were present, or maybe only the parent and the care coordinator were present. That's not a wraparound meeting. That's a meeting, but certainly not a wraparound meeting. You want to make sure that you've got all of the players attending and in place and participating. So here's some steps that providers can take to ensure family-driven care. And these are really some takeaways that you can think about if you're in a position where you can influence some of the decisions that get made about a wraparound project. The first one, obviously, is hire diverse family partners, parent partners, and many of them. This is a key piece that we see changing the face of the way services get provided, is this piece about peer support. Implement family finding or family search and engagement. If you don't know what that is, there is a whole movement now to work with youth that are involved in child welfare who have been identified as not having family or not having family available, or family's rights have been removed. And what family search and engagement does is it actually is a process where Department of Child and Family Services works with a staff member and helps mine the files and do a search for family members that youth could be connected with or possibly go and live with at some point in the future. Mary Smith from the state of Washington has done a lot of training on this and practiced it within her own agency. And I know in Los Angeles County, we began to roll this out within our Department of Child and Family Services to help youth that have lingered in care for sometimes up to 5, 6, 7 years and had multiple placements. And we were trying to find a permanent home for them. And so this family search and engagement is just a crucial piece to be able to utilize within the RAP process to make that happen. In the implementing child and family team in Wraparound, families choose extensive family, friends, and networks that will be available to support the child. It's crucial to be able to bring those natural supports in, because when we're gone, when we've finished Wraparound and a family has transitioned out of services, those natural supports are the ones that will be there to support the family. Because one of the things that we know is the behaviors, while they may get better, there are going to be times in that youth's life and in that family's life when families are going to need to tap into those friends and family members to support them through difficult bumps along the way. Family voice and choice is always a top priority in a RAP team. Every family member has a choice of a diverse family partner for ongoing support. Program has practices and collaborations that ensure all families' needs are addressed. And again, here we're talking about furniture, school clothes, help with the rent. If you are working with a family that's homeless, that is afraid about being evicted from their home, is in need of diapers, is in need of food, that in some way the normal everyday things that everyone needs are not available to them, it's pretty difficult to plan on how to take care of their child and how to make things better. And so those needs really need to be addressed. And part of the whole wraparound process is that most RAP programs have the ability to access flexible funds. But I know one of the things that we like to concentrate on in the RAP project I was involved and was a no-cost or a low-cost option to really be able to help meet those kind of non-categorical things that families need just to survive. Having an expert facilitator or an expert care coordinator, someone that really has the ability to work a team, to be aware of folks' hidden agendas, and to get it on the table and to get people talking and to help build a consensus across a disparate group of folks takes someone that has some experience. And so care coordinator position, facilitator position is not for the lighter part. It's really for someone that has the ability to make things happen and to set their own kind of thoughts aside in making that way toward progress. Some more steps that can be taken is to keep data of staff contacts with families in home and their community. One of the things that we did was that we started to keep track of how often staff were meeting with families in their home and their community versus having meetings in offices or more traditional places to meet. And what we found in looking at that data was that the outcomes tended to be better when there was more contact in the home with families, when things were happening out in the community. So there can be little things that don't take a whole lot of research or pulling in your research team to do that you can keep track of that really can point to better outcomes. Ensure that your clinical staff that are involved have expertise in family systems and that are really aware of how to engage families are informed with trauma-informed care, and oftentimes we see MST as part of that piece, but really having some knowledge, expertise knowledge on family systems and meeting families where they're at. A CEO or a high-level administrator that calls the family and greets them prior to the family being admitted to the program or after, and holds transition feedback meetings is a huge plus. I can't tell you how families appreciate knowing that someone at the top is really looking at how help is being delivered and feeling that they make that they're worth giving a call to. Having an open door policy where families can provide feedback to executive management or direct care staff is another really good piece of good policy to implement. Getting a senior management position just to focus on family-driven care, someone that's going to keep their eye on the ball and make sure that it's moving forward. It's really easy not to be family-driven when things are going wrong. And I will tell you that too often what I've seen happen is when there's a crisis with a family or a crisis with a youth, people go back to doing things the way that they learned to do them and often forget about all of their good wraparound skills and ability and forget about being family-driven. But having someone in a senior management position that can really do the, from the balcony view or that global view and keep folks focused on family-driven is really a key piece to keeping that on the horizon. And then establishing parent and youth advisory councils that report to a CEO and management is another really good piece of policy that can be implemented to make sure that wraparound is happening in the way that it should. Some other steps, creating opportunities for families to go on weekend outings, to have the chance to be proud of their children, and to really create positive memories for those families. Too often we see kids that are in programs being sent off for the weekend with the other children that are in the program without family, and so they tend to bond with one another rather than with their family, which is really what we're focused on. So think about when you're creating those kinds of field trips or events that happen, that you're not just, pulling together the youth that are involved in the program, but you're actually creating situations where families can learn and practice some of the skills that we're working on in Wraparound. Supporting siblings is a huge piece of it. It's, you've got, when a youth is enrolled in services, the whole family is affected. And including their siblings in those meetings and supporting them and supporting the family and being conscious that not only is the family raising the identified child, but they're also raising other siblings that may have suffered trauma just from the very fact that their sibling is enrolled in services or things that have gone on at school or whatever it happens to be. It's just a key piece that you need to keep your eyes on. No more group rec. Again, this speaks to the first one. Create individualized activities based on the youth and family's interests and talents, and involve the siblings and families and extended families. Oftentimes, during the holidays, we'll see agencies, gather up freebies and donations, and we'll have the youth come in and give the youth gifts for the holidays. A better idea might be, why not give those gifts to the family and have the families put those under their tree so that it can become a family experience as opposed to an agency experience. And then really pooling your collaborations, especially around clinical expertise in the community, having access, RAP teams have access to trauma, someone that's a specialist on trauma or substance abuse and domestic violence, and, knowing folks that can provide supports around housing or community activities, peer mentors, or even respite are really good collaborations and linkages to keep in mind. And then having the ability to offer respite care in home. And there are times when families and youth just need a break, and especially being able to establish those respite from someone that the youth is familiar with, a family friend, a relative, and being able to support that respite and know that it's just part of the way things will need to happen to help keep things at a calm place for the youth or family. So some takeaways for you as we move forward and we try and take some of what we are talking about today into the practices that you will be implementing. Be really clear with families about their inclusive role. Let them know that you expect them to participate. Maybe give them some time in the beginning until they get acclimated, but be clear with them about their role in being present and being included in the planning and decision-making. Ask them what might hinder their involvement. Oftentimes it's transportation or child care for their other children. It's the time of day that meetings are being planned. Or it might be a connection with staff. Maybe there's just a bad vibe going on between a family member and a wraparound staff, and you really need to be keenly aware of those types of things that can prevent the engagement piece and that hinder the family's involvement. Communicate with them often. Recognize that there will be a whole range of emotions, not just for the family but for the youth. But for families, it's really about this loss, this anger, this shame and blame and guilt and of having a child with a mental health diagnosis or a child that has big behaviors. Don't shy away from their emotions. Be open to their emotions, support them in working through them. It's really part of the process, and it's not something that may stay with them forever if they're able to really be hopeful about the future. Focus on interventions that build skills for everyday life and homeschool and community. Can't say this enough. It's about getting kids out into the community, into schools, and living in a forever home. Don't set staff up to be the experts. Oftentimes I see this happen with parent partners where the staff may set a parent partner up to kind of be a role model for a family or an expert. This is not ever a good thing, because oftentimes it makes the family feel less than and that they will never be able to achieve what this parent partner or whoever is being set up to be the expert is achieving. And so be careful about setting folks up to be experts. And don't promise that you'll be able to fix things, because We all know that you can't make a promise like that because it may not happen. You may be able to help things get better, but you've got to be honest with families. Focus on the whole family and work with families and their individual culture. So one of the questions, well, several questions that I'd like to ask you about, can you be family-driven? Are you able to really demonstrate respect, genuineness, and empathy to each family that you meet? Can you develop an understanding of the family's past, their current situation and concerns and potential? Are you willing to take the time that it might take to make that happen? Can you respond to concrete needs quickly? And families are in crisis that oftentimes they want to see action. And when we sit around in wraparound teams, oftentimes families feel that we're sitting around talking about the problems. What we need to be doing is planning those action steps, planning those interventions. Families want to be able to see things happen quickly, and they want it to be concrete. Can you be aware of your own biases and prejudices, set those aside so that you can work with families? Can you be consistent, reliable, and honest with families and disclose all information? Can you respect their culture, their racial, ethnic, linguistic, and sexual orientation and gender identity of all families? And can you keep the focus on hope, empowerment, and the future? If you're able to do these things, and you may not be able to do all of them right now, it may take some getting used to, it may take some practice. You may lapse back at any time in your career to not be able to do some of these things, but if your heart's in it and you really want to move forward and embrace family-driven care, these are some of the things that you need to be able to implement. So our last question to you is, if this were your child or you were the child or youth, what would you be looking for? How would you want to be treated? Would you be satisfied with the outcome? Always be thinking about that. If this were you, or if you were the youth, or if this was your child, what would you want? And would this work for you? So, Marlene, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, everyone, for listening to this. And we're going to post this, which you'll know because that's how you're going to do it, and have some questions to follow for your weekly assignment. So thanks, everyone.